Hello and welcome to Real Talk Horror, the show where we dive deep into the dark recesses of cinematic nightmares, peeling back the layers of fear, creativity, and the chaos that make horror such an enduring genre. I'm Josh, your ever-curious guide into all things creepy, chilling, and downright gruesome. Today, my friends, we're kicking off a brand new series that I've been dying to share with you, pun very much intended. We're about to embark on a journey through the twisted, blood-soaked world of one of modern horror's most divisive figures, Rob Zombie. Now, let's address the decapitated elephant in the room. Rob Zombie's films are polarizing to say the least. Some fans swear by his gritty, grindhouse-style vision, while others can't get past what they see as over-the-top gore and indulgent chaos. Love him or hate him, one thing's undeniable. Rob Zombie has carved a distinct, bloody niche in horror cinema that demands attention. So here's the game plan. Over the next few episodes, one per movie, we're going to dive into his filmography, exploring each film. We'll analyze his unique style, dissect the themes that run through his work, and of course, I'll give you my take on whether these films are horror masterpieces or beautiful disasters. And here's the big question we'll be wrestling with. Is Rob Zombie the misunderstood genius of modern horror? Or is he its most notorious indulgent auteur? That's what we'll try to figure out and put together. But before we start slicing into the films themselves, we need to talk about the man behind the madness. Who is Rob Zombie? Where did he come from? And how did this shock rock frontman transform into the one of the most talked about filmmakers in the genre? So buckle up. We're about to take a ride into the strange, macabre, and undeniably fascinating life of Rob Zombie. Let's begin by rewinding the clock and taking a closer look at the origins of the man we now know as Rob Zombie. He was born Robert Bartlett Cummings, quite the mouthful, right? On January 12, 1965, in the small town of Haverhill, Massachusetts. His childhood was very colorful. His family encouraged creativity, but they weren't exactly rolling in wealth. It was a life that balanced artistic freedom with a sense of scrappiness, and you can see both of those influences in his work today. Rob's love affair with the creepy and the macabre started young. Picture little Rob glued to the TV, watching classic monster movies like Frankenstein or Dracula, and falling in love with the eerie, otherworldly vibe of old school horror. Add to that a fascination with carnivals, the weird, grimy, anything could happen energy of the Midway, and you've got the early ingredients of what would later become his signature aesthetic. Fast forward to 1985, Rob, now a young adult with dreams bigger than Haverhill, packs his bags and heads to New York City to attend Parsons School of Design. This is where the story takes an interesting turn. While he's studying art and design, he found himself drawn to music. Specifically, creating music that felt like an extension of the strange, dark worlds he loved. And so, White Zombie was born. Formed in 1985, the band was a wild fusion of heavy metal and bizarre horror-inspired aesthetics. Even their name was a nod to the 1932 Bela Lugosi film White Zombie, one of the first zombie movies ever made. That love for old school horror was baked into their DNA from day one. White Zombie wasn't an overnight success though. They spent years grinding it out, playing underground shows and slowly building a following. But their big break came with their third album, Los Exorcisto, Devil Music Volume 1. It was loud, weird, and completely unapologetic, and fans loved it. Then came Astro Creep 2000, their follow-up album, which turned them into bona fide rock stars. Tracks like More Human Than Human were everywhere, and suddenly, Rob Zombie was a name everyone knew, or at least heard whispered in the dark corners of the music world. But here's the thing about Rob Zombie. He's never been content to stick to just one medium. Even during White Zombie's heyday, he was planting the seeds for what would become his filmmaking career. If you've ever seen one of White Zombie's music videos, you know what I'm talking about. Rob directed many of them himself, and they were like anything else at the time, dark, surreal, and dripping with bizarre imagery. These weren't just videos, they were mini horror films. It's clear now that this was his way of experimenting, testing the waters, and building the visual language that would eventually define his movies. So even while he was rocking out on stage, the seeds of his future as a filmmaker were quietly taking root. And trust me, those roots were about to grow into something truly twisted. So what happens when a shock rock icon with a love for horror and a flair for the theatrical decides to take on Hollywood? Well, in Zombie's case, he dives into the director's chair with that same unrelenting energy that defined his music career. After White Zombie disbanded in 1998, Rob didn't waste any time. He launched a successful solo music career. Albums like Hellbilly Deluxe kept his signature brand of macabre metal alive and well, but something bigger was brewing. He'd always been more than just a musician. He was a storyteller, and Hollywood was calling his name. Now, Zombie's entry into filmmaking wasn't some happy accident. It was a deliberate rebellion. By the late 90s and early 2000s, mainstream horror had become fairly sanitized. It was formulaic, predictable, and frankly kind of safe. And that didn't sit well with Zombie. He wanted to make movies that were raw, visceral, and dripping with the grimy, blood-soaked aesthetic of the grindhouse films he grew up loving. And in 2003, he made his bold debut with House of a Thousand Corpses. Let me paint a picture for you. House of a Thousand Corpses is like stepping into a neon-lit haunted house on acid. It's chaotic, grotesque, and absolutely weird. A hallucinogenic mix of horror, gore, and black comedy. But here's the kicker. The film almost didn't see the light of day. It was rejected by multiple studios for being too violent, too graphic, and way too controversial. Rob Zombie, true to form, didn't back down. He fought to get his vision out there, and when it finally hit theaters, it made waves. House of a Thousand Corpses divided audiences and critics like few films do. Some people loved its wild, unfiltered style, while others thought it was just too much. But whether you loved it or hated it, one thing was clear. Rob Zombie wasn't interested in playing by anyone else's rules. And just like that, a cult classic was born, and Zombie solidified himself as a director with a unique vision, and it was polarizing. But House of a Thousand Corpses was just the beginning. It kicked off what we now know as the Firefly trilogy. In 2005, Rob Zombie gave us The Devil's Rejects, a gritty gut punch of a sequel that leaned more into the crime drama side of horror while still delivering plenty of carnage. And in 2019, he brought the story full circle with 3 from Hell. Each film built on the twisted legacy of the Firefly family while exploring themes of chaos, revenge, and survival. And in between his work on the Firefly saga, Zombie took on one of the biggest challenges a horror director could face: reimagining a classic. In 2007, he released his version of Halloween, reinterpreting John Carpenter's iconic slasher with his own dark, gritty spin. It wasn't just about Michael Myers stalking babysitters. This time it was a deep dive into the trauma and dysfunction that created the monster. 2 years later, he followed it up with Halloween 2, pushing the story and his style even further. What's fascinating about Zombie's films, whether it's House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, or Halloween, is how he blends extreme, grotesque violence with surprisingly tender moments. Underneath the blood and chaos, there's often an exploration of broken families, human vulnerability, and what happens when people are pushed to their limits. It's like he's holding up a cracked mirror to society, forcing us to confront the ugliness we'd rather ignore. So as we start unpacking Zombie's filmography in this series, keep that in mind. Yes, his movies are brutal, violent, and often uncomfortable to watch. But they're also layered, complex, and undeniably his. Love him or hate him, Rob Zombie is a filmmaker who refuses to compromise. And that's a rare thing in any genre, especially horror. So let's dig into what makes Rob Zombie's films stand out in the crowded world of horror. Because there's no denying that his work has a style, a signature, that's instantly recognizable. First off, let's talk about the visuals. Zombie is deeply inspired by grindhouse films, exploitation cinema, and the gritty, unpolished realism of the 1970s. His movies feel like they were dragged through the dirt and left out in the sun to bake. A fever dream where vibrant, grotesque imagery and unrelenting violence collide in this unsettlingly visceral way. It's chaotic, it's messy, and it's so carefully crafted. Every frame feels like it's been dipped in grime and sweat and perfectly captures that underbelly of humanity that he is so fascinated by. And then there's his fascination with the villain, the anti-hero, and the deeply flawed. Zombie doesn't just throw a monster at us and say, "Be afraid." No, he pulls back the curtains and says, "Here's why they're a monster." Whether it's Captain Spaulding and his sadistic Firefly family or Michael Myers in the reimagined Halloween, Zombie dives into humanity, or what's left of it. He's not asking us to excuse their actions, but he forces us to see them as more than just faceless evil. They're terrifying because they're broken, because they're real. Now, I can't talk about Rob Zombie without mentioning the music, right? It's in his DNA. His soundtracks are a whole vibe, a mix of classic rock, eerie atmospheric scores, and unsettling audio snippets that really set the tone for his films. Think about the unforgettable use of Freebird in The Devil's Rejects. It's not just a soundtrack, it's storytelling through sound. Zombie knows how to make his music another character in his films, and it works. But here's the thing, where there's innovation, there's always criticism, and Rob Zombie is no stranger to it. Plenty of people have called his films overly indulgent, saying he prioritizes shock value over solid storytelling. Others argue that his work is too niche and his filmmaking is for a very specific hardcore audience and alienates everyone else. And honestly, they're not exactly wrong, but maybe that is the point. Rob Zombie's not making movies for the mainstream. He's not trying to please everyone, and that's what makes his work so polarizing. If you walk into a Rob Zombie film expecting a polished, predictable horror flick, you are going to be disappointed. Probably horrified too. But if you're craving raw, something that doesn't apologize for being brutal and bizarre, then you're in for a ride. And that's what makes his legacy so fascinating. His films are messy, divisive, and sometimes downright difficult to watch. But they're also undeniably his. In a genre that's often criticized for playing it safe, Zombie is out here swinging for the fences, whether he hits or misses. So as we move forward in this series, keep that in mind. Rob Zombie is a filmmaker who's not afraid to take risks, challenge his audiences, and to leave us squirming in our seats. His legacy isn't about playing by the rules. It's about breaking them, burning them, and dancing in their ashes. So coming up, we'll dive into House of a Thousand Corpses, the film that started it all. But before that, let's take a quick breather here to soak it all in. Don't go anywhere. There's much more to enjoy. Okay, so let's talk about the upcoming series. I already mentioned we're going to begin at the beginning, House of a Thousand Corpses. But over the next few episodes, we're going to dive deep into the whole twisted world of Zombie's filmography, one movie at a time. But this isn't just about watching and reviewing films. No, we're going to pull back the layers. We're going to dissect how his unique style evolved. We're going to explore the themes he revisits and ask those burning questions. What works, what doesn't, and where do his films stand in the broader landscape of horror? We'll kick things off with the next episode in his directorial debut, House of a Thousand Corpses. Now, this is a film with a backstory almost as wild as the movie itself, from its chaotic production process to the studio rejections for being too violent, to its ultimate rise as a cult classic. It's a journey. And of course, we'll talk about the colorful cast of characters. Captain Spaulding, Baby, Otis, and the whole twisted Firefly family. But here's the big question. Is House of Thousand Corpses a grindhouse masterpiece that redefined horror for a new generation? Or is it just a chaotic mess of style over substance? You'll have to tune in to find out where I land on the debate. But more importantly, I want to hear what you think. From there, we'll move through his filmography, taking in The Devil's Rejects, his ambitious Halloween reimagining, the surreal horror of Lords of Salem, and beyond. With each film, we'll explore how Zombie balances, or sometimes struggles to balance, his signature aesthetic with storytelling. We'll talk themes like his obsession with broken families and the thin line between humanity and monstrosity. We'll break down those unforgettable soundtracks and how they shape the mood of each film. And we'll dig into the controversy. Because, let's face it, Zombie's films don't just spark conversation, they light it on fire. So whether you're already a diehard fan, a curious newcomer, or someone who's been on the fence about his work, this series has something for you. We're going to celebrate, critique, and hopefully challenge some of your perceptions about Rob Zombie as a filmmaker. Now buckle up, because this is going to be a bloody, bizarre, and fascinating ride through the mind of one of horror's most polarizing figures. Again, next week we're going to tackle House of a Thousand Corpses, but for now, I'll leave you with this. What's your first impression of Rob Zombie as a director? Do you love him? Do you hate him? Are you somewhere in between? Let me know, because I'm all about the dialogue. And remember, this series isn't just about me talking into the void. It's about us exploring the world of horror together. So grab your popcorn, lock your doors, and get ready. This is Real Talk Horror, and we're just getting started. Wow, what a ride. Thank you for joining me today as we look back on the life and career of Rob Zombie, a figure who is as bold and bizarre as the films he creates. So whether you're already a fan of his work, or you're just now working up the courage to dip into his twisted cinematic world, I hope you're as excited as I am for what's ahead. Rob Zombie's films aren't for the faint of heart, but they sure do spark conversation. And I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts on Zombie as a filmmaker, the misunderstood horror visionary, or is he just veering too far into chaos? Maybe you're somewhere in the middle. Let me know your take. You can find me over on Instagram and Threads at realreal.talk, or drop a comment wherever you're listening right now. And hey, if this episode got you intrigued or maybe just a little terrified, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the show so you don't miss a single scream-filled moment of this series. Share this episode with your fellow horror-loving friends. And if you enjoy what you heard today, leave a review. Not only does it mean the world to me, but it also helps us reach more fans who live for horror like we do. Again, next time on Real Talk, we're going to dive straight into the chaos, House of a Thousand Corpses, the film that kicked off Zombie's filmmaking journey and really cemented his place as one of horror's most polarizing directors. You won't want to miss it. Until then, my friends, keep it creepy, keep it real. And remember, the scariest things aren't always on the screen. They're often lurking in the shadows right out of sight. So sweet screams, everyone.